One kidney, two pipes. Sounds a little strange, right? Well, today we're talking all about our body's internal plumbing. We're going to look at the blueprint we're all built from, which is usually pretty standard, but sometimes it comes with a surprisingly common twist.
All right, let's kick things off with a question. What do you think is the most common congenital anomaly in the entire human urinary tract? The answer might surprise you. It's not something you'd ever see from the outside. Nope, it's hidden deep inside with an organ we don't really think about unless there's a problem: the kidney. And there's your answer. The single most common variation is having a kidney with two drain pipes, or ureters, instead of the usual one. It sounds pretty simple, but believe me, this little tweak in the body's blueprint can have some really fascinating consequences. So the official name for this is a duplex collecting system. All it means is that one kidney gets drained by two tubes instead of the normal one. Now, there are two main flavors of this. Sometimes those two tubes join together into one before they get to the bladder, and other times they go all the way to the bladder separately. And that difference? Well, it turns out to be absolutely crucial. Okay, so how does this even happen in the first place? To get that, we need to rewind the clock way, way back to the very beginning, when an embryo is just starting to lay out its internal plumbing. All right, let's look at the body's normal plan for building a kidney. It all starts with this tiny little sprout called the ureteric bud. Think of it growing out from the main plumbing line. This little bud travels up until it meets the tissue that's destined to become a kidney. And once it makes contact, bam, it tells that tissue, hey, time to become a kidney. Then it branches out and forms a single elegant collecting system. But with a duplex system, the blueprint gets a little edit. For what we call an incomplete duplication, that single bud we just talked about, well, it just splits in two a little too early before it reaches the kidney. But for a complete duplication, the body actually sends out two totally separate buds right from the get-go. So you see, it's two different developmental paths that lead to two very different versions of this condition. And that leads us right into the two big categories here: complete versus incomplete duplication. They might sound pretty similar, but their impact on a person's health can be worlds apart. Okay, check this out, because this is where it really matters. With an incomplete duplication, those two ureters join up into one pipe before they hit the bladder. Most of the time, no big deal. People often don't even know they have it. But with complete duplication, those are two totally separate pipes running all the way down. And that is where the trouble usually starts. So let's talk about that incomplete type for a second. There's this weird phenomenon that can happen. Instead of all the urine flowing nicely down to the bladder, some of it can actually slosh from one of the upper branches into the other one. It goes back and forth, kind of like a yo-yo. And that's exactly what it's called: yo-yo reflux. It's usually not a major problem, but it's a super interesting little quirk of our internal plumbing. Now, let's get back to the complete duplication, which is where things get more complicated. There's this one fundamental rule of anatomy that explains pretty much all the problems that can pop up. It sounds a little technical, but bear with me because it's fascinating. It's called the Wiegert-Meyer rule, and it basically describes this weird crossing of the pipes. So what does that rule actually mean? Get this. The ureter coming from the top part of the kidney actually connects to the bladder in a spot that's lower and more toward the middle than the ureter from the bottom part. I know, it's totally backwards. And this strange, abnormal connection, it's the source of almost all the clinical issues we're about to dive into. Which brings us to the big question. So what? Why does this even matter? Well, it matters because this quirky plumbing, especially with complete duplication, isn't just a fun fact. It can lead to some real health issues. Because of that wacky Wiegert-Meyer rule, a whole bunch of things can go wrong. For starters, that upper ureter might plug into the wrong place entirely. That's called an ectopic ureter. Or its opening can get swollen and blocked, creating something called a ureter seal. Then there's vesico-ureteral reflux, or VUR, where urine flows backward from the bladder up toward the kidney. And you know what all of these can lead to? Yep, recurrent, nasty urinary tract infection. And that ectopic ureter, it's a perfect example of how a tiny difference in anatomy can have a huge impact, especially between genders. In males, the tube usually connects before the sphincter muscle that controls urine flow, so incontinence isn't an issue. But in females, it can connect after that sphincter. This can cause a constant, slight dribble of urine, a really frustrating problem that can be super hard to diagnose. So when a doctor thinks something's up, how do they actually figure this out? Well, they'll use medical imaging, like an X-ray. And sometimes what they see is a telltale sign that has a beautifully poetic name. It's called the drooping lily sign. Seriously, it's this classic image in radiology, and when they see it, it's a dead giveaway that they're looking at a duplex kidney with a complication. So what exactly is a drooping lily? Well, remember that upper part of the kidney with the wonky ureter? It can get blocked and swell up with fluid. This swollen top part then pushes down on the healthy lower part of the kidney, making it sag downwards. And on an x-ray, the whole thing looks exactly like a wilting flower, a drooping lily. It's pretty incredible. Okay, so a doctor sees the drooping lily sign or figures out the problem in another way. The next logical step is, well, how do you fix the flow? Well, there's a whole toolkit of treatments ranging from pretty simple to more complex. For things like UTIs, antibiotics might be all you need. But if that ureter is in the wrong spot, surgeons can actually perform a ureteral reimplantation. Basically, they move it to the right place in the bladder. Or they can do something called a ureteral ureterostomy, which is a mouthful, but it just means they connect the problematic ureter to the normal one, essentially rerouting the pipes. And if a part of the kidney is really badly damaged and not working, they might have to do a partial nephrectomy and remove that non-functioning piece.